Hey guys, it's Emily in the Preserve. Anyway, I'm about to start this video. It's a presentation I made to a mortuary college class, so I just wanted to point that out. There's nothing in this presentation that's not appropriate for a general audience, but it is remarks that I made with a sort of inside or prospective funeral industry audience in mind, and there's definitely a couple places in the presentation where that would be obvious, but I thought it bore explaining. Anyway, enough from me. I will go ahead and start the video. I might pause it one or two times to just explain something a little better, make a clarification, but let me know what you think. Thanks so much. Okay, great. This slide is all about testing out the technical abilities. So I think we've surmounted that. So we'll go ahead and introduce myself. As Faith said, my name is Emily Miller. I am a licensed funeral director, embalmer. I am also the founder, owner, operator of Colorado Burial Preserve and Cremation Garden in Florence, Colorado. Just a little bit of history about myself, how I came to be here today. Way back in the olden days before color photography, I went to Lake Washington Technical College, now Lake Washington Institute of Tech, outside of Seattle. And slightly more recently than that, in the 1860s, I met Abe Lincoln. I'm not going to explain to you guys why we leave. I have Abe in the presentation because sometimes I do a little funeral history of kind of why it's significant for an embalming apprentice to meet Abe Lincoln, but I know you guys know that. So suffice to say, this guy had his this is a replica of Abe Lincoln's traveling casket. And this impersonator does this little President's Day history presentation. And he came to do it at the funeral home where I did my apprenticeship. And more recently than that, in 2019, I was working as the general manager of Rundis Funeral Home in Broomfield and Darrell Howe Mortuary in Lafayette. I am also a certified life cycle celebrant. And it was my experience, this is kind of throughout that whole track, but most especially in what I learned in my time in funeral service here in Colorado, that led me to found and open the Burial Preserve. Way back in the beginning of that slide, when I was in mortuary college, was actually my first exposure to green burial as an option. It was in funeral directing options class towards my degree. This book, Grave Matters, was on the syllabus, and that, as far as I can remember in my life, was the first time I ever encountered green burial as a modern possibility. And I had an immediate reaction to it, I think on an emotional level, like the idea that the body returns to the earth and the nutrients can be reused by nature. I find that very reassuring, like if I contemplate death. And I also really was attracted to the idea of a final resting place in a beautiful natural setting, a place like not touched by human hands and mowing and trimming and fertilizing, and especially here in the West, irrigation of growing lawn. I've always had a vendetta against lawnmowers because they always wake me up on Saturday mornings if I try to sleep with the windows open. So I'm like, if I was buried in a cemetery with lawn mowing, I would have to be haunting those people for eternity. So like, it's not for me. I immediately knew that this idea of a natural setting, final resting place, was the an option that I would want for me, would want for my family. And as I entered my career in funeral service, I really, I had this little internal radar looking out for, I always wanted to work on those cases that were closer to what I would envision for myself. So real quick, what is green burial, kind of as defined by Harris? This is a way of caring for the dead that furthers environmental aims. So there's definitely a part of this that's saying, hey, the conventional funeral industry is going through all these chemicals, all this concrete, all this steel. Is it all necessary? I think we're going to find in many cases, there is some element of waste to it. And I'm going to talk about the business ramifications of that as well. But in our society in this day and age, I think more and more people are saying, hey, maybe some of these things should be biodegradable, or maybe some of these things should be locally sourced. Green burial also has some elements that are not just material like that, but in the community, meaning this place, a natural burial ground, can become a natural resource. It's also a resource for grievers. And the process of a green burial it's a great opportunity to encourage family participation because they are right out there. They can see the dirt. The grave is shallow. Sometimes the lowering is by hand with straps and the closing is with shovels. So there's like many opportunities to pull the family into the burial process. And I think there is a lot of intrinsic good to that as well. Backing up from that, just to do a little bit of history here, some of our most ancient evidence of burial at all is natural burial. For me, it's like this basic human instinct. You know, you hear this popular saying that the first evidence of culture is, archaeological evidence of someone who had a broken leg but healed. And this is evidence that these people were taking care of each other and not just wild animals. And for me, I would put burying the dead right in that same category. I mean, this is something that is unique to our species and has been taking place since we had language and since we had culture. The earth has been enough, the soil has been enough to process our dead that whole time. And of course, you do have ancient evidence of cremations and of burials with preservation. But this thread of the earth is good enough, it's dust to dust. This is like really basic to who we are as people, in my opinion. And more recently, in recorded history, we have the two of the three great monotheistic religions have been practicing natural burial practices, not only in history, but continually throughout this whole time. When I was still in mortuary college, I did my internship at a funeral home in Seattle. And it was funeral home cemetery combo. And one of the cemeteries we operated had an Orthodox Jewish section. It was owned by the synagogue, but we operated it for them. So some of my earliest experiences as a funeral intern were these simple Jewish Orthodox green burials. And it's an all wood casket. The grave is prepared with no vault. Just like in this picture here, they line it up to use straps for the hand lowering so that the community can physically bear the weight of the loved one that they've lost. And same thing with the shoveling. There is a communal element where everyone takes a turn shoveling the dirt back in to close the grave. And me, as this impressionable young funeral intern, I'm just like, this is so beautiful. I couldn't understand why, why doesn't every graveside service include the communal shoveling? Because what an important symbolic act, and et cetera. I really found those Orthodox Jewish services meaningful. And later in my career in California, I worked at a combo funeral home cemetery with a Islamic section. And those burials were all, they used both a shroud and a cardboard box. The cardboard box was only used to get the person out to the gravesite. And then the members of the community would take them out of the box and lay them just on the soil at the bottom of the grave. And this cemetery would use an overturned vault, meaning the body could be in contact with the soil, but the lawnmowers still would have the support of the vault and the earth, et cetera. So we could still have sort of a conventional cemetery, but allow these cultural natural burial practices. And then in mainstream and Christian culture, you have this early modern green burial movement. You know, these religious communities have just been calling it burial the entire time. But in the 90s in particular, and particularly in England, and then coming to the United States, you have secular and Christian culture refinding these elements of return to nature and of simplistic, less materialism in the funeral practices. And so we have seen this slow growth of options for natural burial across UK and United States. And in fact, you may have more people who are interested in natural burial than you have facilities and cemeteries for natural burial. That is changing fast, but that is what kind of the current situation has been. As I founded the Burial Preserve, I'm like joining this movement of, you know what, I want this for myself and my family. Why don't we have this in our community? It's coming to more and more communities. There's a lot of people on my same, either cemeteries that have been recently started or groups that are working to start their own burial grounds, et cetera, et cetera. It's definitely a movement. And within that movement, I sort of mentioned already, it's definitely a multi-faith stew. But for example, Baha'i faith, natural burial is the practice for folks of those faiths, and that's going to feature into the story I'm about to tell. And I've also been involved with burial of Catholic priests and Catholic monks. And those we did do embalming, but it was a plain pine casket with no interior. It has to do with this like vow of poverty that goes along with those monastic traditions. Anyway, green burial elements are all around us. And I'm making an argument that we can put it all together in a way that's really good for the community, really good for the land, and really good for our business in funeral service. Okay, so back to 2019, when I was the funeral service manager up there in the north suburbs of Denver, family asked me, it was a sudden death, and it was a young mom who was the only next of kin. She had a lot on her plate. She said, my dad was Baha'i faith. We only ever had one conversation about this, but I know it's supposed to be a natural burial. And, you know, he wanted it in a place with a beautiful view of the mountains. And I said, you have come to the right funeral director. I love green burial. I am going to find your dad, you know, the most beautiful natural burial grave that we can anywhere in Colorado. And I went to the Green Burial Council and I started there, and I went to Google and I'm looking all around. And that was the moment when I realized that we didn't really have a place that would satisfy me for natural burial in Colorado. These two pictures are from, on the left here, are from Evergreen Memorial Park in Evergreen. And it's a beautiful place. They allow natural burials, but they also allow conventional burials. And you can see this little shack says Garden of the Pioneers. It's also a wedding venue there. It's also a petting zoo there. It's a beautiful place. But for me, you feel the culture of the settlement of the Old West. It's touched by human hands. And this example from Fort Collins at the Municipal Cemetery, Roselawn, what they call a hybrid burial grounds is, it is a conventional cemetery, but they have a certain section where they allow shroud burials, no vault burials, et cetera. For me, the overall environment is still very manicured. You know, I would still have to be haunting someone as they weed whack my grave. But so when I was serving this family back in late of 2019, I really thought, gosh, like for myself and for my family, I am unsatisfied with what our options here are. And if this one family I'm helping wanted it, and if my family wants it, like, oh, now there's two of us, maybe we can, you know, maybe there's a element of the market here that we can develop and really bring a new option to Colorado. So that is the story of the genesis of Colorado Burial Preserve and Cremation Garden in Florence. Let's see, the company was founded in 2020. We opened in late of 2018, and we had our first burial in December of 2018. Anyway, we opened in August of 2021. That's where the 8 came from. And we had our first burial December 1st of 2021. So we are 80-acre preserve in Florence. There's one little corner of it that won't be developable for cemetery, but it is a big place. We have 6 sections that have been developed. I say developed, it means we can legally sell the graves. We didn't really do anything. We didn't clear away any nature. We don't do that. But we have 6 different sections that are designated for natural burial and cremation. We are still under construction. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute, but we're really in the process of making a whole visitor experience. Really want this to be a public space so that anyone can get the benefits that I'm touting here about what natural burial is. So a lot of that's still coming in the woodwork. I mentioned we do cremation burial. We are also certified by the Green Burial Council at their natural burial grounds level. So I showed Roselawn Cemetery. That's a Green Burial Council hybrid, meaning they allow both conventional and green burials. Natural burial ground is entirely dedicated to natural burial, and it also pledges to have management that does no harm to the long-term ecological health of the site. So our rules for interments are there's no embalming unless there's going to be cremation later. There is no vault or outer burial container. The graves are very large, so if someone has like one of these little cacti or bushes going in their grave, no problem. We'll just make the excavation to the side of it. We can leave that nature going. We also actually leave, there's a couple places in the preserve where we have trees that have died, but the rotting in the dead wood is actually really ecologically important. So even if right in the middle of the burial ground, there's a dead old thing, that's great. It's an important piece of nature. Leave it, we'll bury you somewhere else, because the whole idea is that we are going to manage this space. We can do cemetery operations without harming the environment. We had to have the place surveyed by an ecologist, so we would have an understanding of what all the native species and invasive species are, and really develop a plan that's going to be, we don't just say, hey, this is environmentally friendly. We are actively doing our best to restore native prairie environment and sequester carbon and be everything you could hope for when you think of a company that's doing something right for the planet. Along those same lines, our endowment care. It is state law, which I'm following, but it's also good practice for cemeteries. So a portion of our sales go into a long-term trust fund account, and that is how we can promise to our customers that this will be, you know, a community resource for years and years to come. One thing you should know about, maybe you do know about our situation here in Colorado is we do have invasive species that, you know, they were introduced in the 1800s with shipments of grain from Europe. And they are specialists at getting established in disturbed ground and in ground that is lacking in water, which we most certainly are here in Florence. So if you just go out and dig a pit in your yard or whatever, anywhere in Colorado, and do nothing, next year, the first and only species that are growing there will be the ones that are not native to our ecosystem. And they actually have biological and chemical ways of forcing out our native species. That's why they're so invasive. They're awesome at getting established in disturbed lands. Whereas our native plants, they need more exacting conditions. Sometimes they need more time. Sometimes they need relationships between species in order to establish. So if you're not going to be a cemetery where you just roll out the sod and water it, in my opinion, you really have a responsibility to take an active restoration management strategy with the land. So we are planting over 30 different native species. This is included when I charge the family for the opening and closing. Part of that fee goes to enrollment in our native species restoration program. Oh, here, let's look at some pictures of native species while I'm describing this. So as I mentioned, with the drought and everything, these natives take time to get established. And so depending on when the person is buried, it might be really unlucky for when we get rain and when the seeds go in and whatever. It may take multiple seasons of this active management for us to really be able to make a difference for the native ecology. But regardless of those challenges, I believe it's the right thing to do. And that's why I only charge the family the one fee for our proactive management. Yeah, so the planting is one part of the of everything we're trying to do to improve the conditions out there. And these are the other parts. The depth of the grave is much more shallow, 3 to 4 feet, and this allows more oxygen to reach the decomposition process. You want those aerobic processes. You don't want the anaerobic putrefaction. Shallow burial optimizes land otherwise unusable. That is to say, you don't need to be able to get down all the way 6 or 10 feet. You don't have to be able to bring in that huge equipment to be able to dig a 10-foot hole. You can dig a smaller hole and save all that logistical and maybe impossibilities with the equipment by just using a smaller hole. This thing about the pH, what the truth is that when you, I mean, any living tissue, same in your compost pile, but when these natural processes happen in the earth in conjunction with the, native soil fungi and bacteria and et cetera, and, all the different bioactivity there, this can actually improve the health of the soil. And despite the fact that we are using this shallow depth, there has not been any evidence of animal activity. It's not like, oh, you need a vault to keep out the scavengers. Your grave mound is going to do that just fine. And in fact, I'll show you a picture in a little bit, but with natural burial, all of the soil goes back in the grave. You don't take a truckload away to compensate for the displacement of what you've just buried. So you end up with this mound, which will slowly settle over time. And that way you're not being reductive from the environment, et cetera. And then, as I mentioned, we'll do that, all of that. And another thing on here should say, we're burying the person with a lot of organic material, because that introduces these microbes and places for oxygen to hide and ability to absorb and hold, delay the loss of moisture, et cetera, et cetera. So all those combined with our planting program is really my answer to, well, how do you manage a cemetery if you're not going to use vaults and sods? It's with dedication and patience, but also with the best of our ecological science and through rewilding of native spaces. So these are just some examples of the of what a burial here would look like. I sort of mentioned most of these things already. The flowers are so pretty and it makes the family so happy. I always, if I put flowers in the grave, get an extra thank you about that. So I'll never not do it because you guys know, it really is about serving the family. So, but also all this greenery, as I said, it's good for moisture, oxygen, and microbiology. We'll also, as we close the grave, layer in more of this type of organic material, because the truth about our native soil here is due to the erosive forces in Colorado, there's not a lot of organic content in our native soil, and we can fix that. I left in this handmade wooden casket. That seems to be what's trending. We will allow any biodegradable container, from a simple shroud, blanket, bed sheet, cardboard cremation container, basket, caskets, some creative option, not a refrigerator box, et cetera. But so far seems to be the trend. Folks are really responding to these all wood caskets. I think it's great because you still have handles. You still have some things that are familiar from a conventional funeral service. And then, of course, it's not sealed in any way, and the wood itself will ultimately biodegrade. And this is just an example. I already mentioned the benefits of family loved ones shoveling in the grave. For me, I think if you break a sweat working at your loved one's funeral, you work through something in your grief journey. I'm going to bring this up again in a little bit, but they say you might forget what they said, you might forget their names, but you never forget the way something made you feel. And there is something incredibly significant about, the act of not just attending a loved one's funeral, but burying a loved one. And so this family actually stayed with me the whole time, not just the lowering, not just a few fistfuls of dirt, but, through until we're putting the little cactuses back in place and installing the marker. We also do cremation burial. This is a little on the right here. That's an example of a cremation burial spot when it's all said and done. That family did not pick a marker. They just kind of collected these little things. Again, the organic material in the grave is pretty. It provides a sense of solace, but it also has this, biological purpose as well. I'm working from a PDF today, so this video won't play, but what I'm holding in this picture is a flat rock. And the truth is that cremated remains are salty and they are high in pH. They are basic. So if you bury them or scatter them, it can be damaging to the plants in the area. In fact, our soil is already salty and basic because it's Colorado, and you don't want to be compounding those problems. So there's a product called Let Your Love Grow, which is like a soil amendment that you can mix with cremated remains to correct the chemistry problems with it before you try and grow a plant. And something else you can do is what I'm attempting to show here, is that you can bury a cremated remains with a flat rock on top of it. And that way, if the plants are growing down, they're gonna, the roots are gonna go off sideways and they won't reach that environment that's gonna be unhealthy to them. And for cremation burial, again, it's no vault, of course. We will use any biodegradable urn. This family, it's actually like a gemologist's rock hounding sack. The deceased was a rock hound. And so this actually had pencil notes on the other side from the 70s, like what specimens he had found in there. Thought it was a really cute idea for a biodegradable urn because it's made of canvas. And the other thing we would do is just sprinkle, pour the ashes right into the prepared grave. It's not a scattering because we're going to do this rock and then cover the grave and then put our plantings in. But those are the options for cremation. And for family plots, you can add cremains because our plots are so big. There's definitely options where, families that are partially natural burial and some other folks are cremated in the closet at home. Really trying to make an argument for interment of cremated remains and not keeping them in the closet at home. We do allow headstones. I'm really trying to bridge this line between I am introducing a new concept to the community. So I want to be as familiar as possible with what a cemetery is and what the rules are. And for me, I think having your name and dates on the rock is, and also being able to walk to the final resting place to pay your respects where the body is lying and not over there on a group plaque. Some natural burial preserves don't allow pedestrian traffic because of the restoration in progress. For me, I don't think that's satisfying to a griever. I think the whole purpose of a cemetery is here lies so-and-so, not like somewhere off in that area is the final resting place. So anyway, for those reasons, I do allow headstones. The policy is it's a natural shape rock, unpolished and not cut into like a human square, but just as nature would have left it. So this bottom one is an example of a naturally occurring rock in the preserve. And I'm trying to make the argument that in 100 years, Cheryl's marker won't detract from the natural flow of the space any more than the naturally occurring boulder would. And just real quick, here's a example of what that grave mound looks like when it's fresh. Before, because we did bury a wood casket, there's an air space between the body and the lid of the casket. By the time we get all the dirt back in, it's quite mounded up. But over time, eventually that casket lid will give way and give up that negative space. And also over time, the forces of erosion will kind of even out the grave mound, and we do see them fall over time. So that's what we are as a cemetery, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about my concept for land use. When you talk to anyone anymore who doesn't like burial, who prefers a scattering or a sea burial or a human composting, the number one argument they say, it's like, oh, well, cemeteries are filling up. It's a waste of space. My argument is when we intentionally create nature, designate this as a public conservation space, it's not a waste at all. Even if we sell 100% of the graves that the preserve could ever accommodate, it is still a nature space. We're working on hiking trails. There's going to be a little of a chapel, so you could have an outdoor gathering. It faces east. This is sunset, but incredible place to have a sunrise chapel service or yoga or bird watching or just environmental education. If a school group wants to come out and find out about native shortgrass prairie, here's a restored, lovingly, sacredly managed example. So I believe, and I've seen in my career, that having a final resting place, a place for grievers, a cemetery, this is a valuable community resource. When there is not a final resting place, you have people show up at the cemetery looking for, hey, my friend so-and-so died back, it was a while ago, but any chance they're buried here? The grievers are not always the immediate circle of the people who are, making the arrangements for the death. And I think that a cemetery's role of being a record keeper, of being a space for grief, works just perfectly with these other examples of a thing that a cemetery can be for the community. So that's my argument, is that this is even better than a conventional cemetery, because when it's all full, it's not a waste, and it's not full of pollutants. It's full of the best that our culture can give back to planet Earth. Along those lines, I mentioned the body composting. I know you guys are probably keyed into these options already because it's been in the news so much. It's actually funny. As I try, my job is now promoting natural burial in Colorado. And every time I bring it up to people, oh, is that thing about the composting I've heard in the news? And it's funny because here I am working with the most ancient option for what to do when someone dies. And I have to reintroduce it over, these kind of flashy, newer ones. But it is so good, the attention that the composting and the water cremation have been getting, because it's really sparking the conversation for what is the environmental toll of funeral service. And if I'm a person who lived my life recycling and bird watching and drove a hybrid electric car, do I really want to be a person who's filled with formaldehyde and buried in a steel and concrete box? I think this conversation is really, you're hearing an upswell of it among the population, and I'm going to return to that point in a minute. But let me just do this list real quick. I mentioned hybrid green burial. There are many places in Colorado that will allow some, I call them half measures towards a natural burial resting place. So maybe they allow a shroud with the overturned vault, like I described in the Islamic burials. The body can still return to the soil because it's in contact with the dirt. Maybe they don't require embalming and they don't require vault, but you have to have a casket. Or maybe it's all the way green as far as underground goes, but then they're mowing the lawn on top. So for a lot of families, one of those options is going to be enough. They're going to feel good about the no embalming and the wood casket and the lawn mowing, and the concrete bases for the headstones aren't going to faze them. I'm a funeral director, so I'm all about whatever option is right for the family is right for the family, full stop. So I also wanted to say, if you guys in your travels are interfacing with a cemetery that's requiring embalming, that's requiring a vault, that's requiring a casket, ask them why. Tell them, my family is really asking for this shroud, no embalming, way to go. Why? I think a lot of especially these small town municipal cemeteries around the West it's like some of them they got their policy from someone else's cemetery, you know, they're just borrowing the text, or, you know, the rules have been inherited down and, you know, no one's really challenged it. And maybe a lot of places are ready because more and more, again, families are asking for this, and especially in municipal cemeteries, those folks have a lot of ability to respond to the needs of their constituents because they're run by the city. So anyway, lots of options that are not quite what I'm describing, meaning this is a conservation setting and everything is for the planet. Water cremation and body composting, I'm not going to go into that other than to say both of those are good for the planet, and they are less carbon emitting than your conventional funeral or your fire cremation. But they all leave the question, so what? It's like the person has to go to a facility, go through the process, and it's not the last decision. Oh, I want to be water cremated. It's then you're going to have both the water and the ashes, or this giant, you know, pickup truck bed's worth of soil. And again, I mentioned this, but I would love to be reminding these families of the benefit of a final resting place. Not just for themselves, but for future generations. You know, this is now a headquarters for the family, right? It's a site of family history, and you never know when someone's going to be born a genealogy buff and be so grateful to find the obituary in the file at the cemetery. You guys may have seen this on social media, but last spring, almost a year ago now, Colorado Burial Preserve was the site of the first laying of composted human remains to happen in Colorado since it became legal here. And we'll actually do two things with the soil here. For me, I just said it, but I'm making this argument that a family wants a cemetery plot. Family needs a cemetery plot. So if someone has been composted and the family's looking for what to do with the site, my first option is do interment rites to a natural burial site. You could still have a headstone. Your family can still come and learn about you. And then they can see, we'll plant it with our 30 different native species, and the family can come back and see next spring, these are the flowers that are growing from the nutrients that we gave back to the earth with Dad. I think it's a great option because, you know, you take a 150-pound person, you get 400 pounds of body compost. Not every family is going to be able to do that. You know, if you live in an apartment, what are you going to do with a pickup truck full of dirt, right? So first option is do a cemetery plot for natural burial of composted remains. That way I'm responsible for making sure it's permanently protected and that your grandkids can come and visit it. Because if you do it at home, eventually, you know, the property is going to have to change hands, et cetera, et cetera. I hate to go into that, but it's true. The second option is by donation. A lot of families are taking home just one urn's worth of the compost. And if they are declining to take the whole amount home, I have signed up with the composting providers to receive the soil to be used in an unmarked area of my choosing, like not in the burial grounds, but on the rest of the property, wherever the soil conditions could benefit from it. Because this is, you know, it's beautiful, nutrient rich, low pH, low salt. You know, it's exactly what I want for to be able to improve the ecological health of my place. And the way the laws are in Colorado, they're somewhat limited in what they can do with it. So I'll take as much as the state wants to make because I've got 80 acres where I'm trying to grow beautiful wildflowers each spring. Okay, switching gears just a little bit. I mentioned, I really think the community is finding out, or they're reconsidering natural, you know, the ecological effects of their funerals and what they want done with their body. They find out about the burial preserve and they call me and they say, this is great. This is what I want done. Tell me a little about the cost. Tell me a little about the timeline. Tell me a little about the rules. They say, I just have one question. How does the body even get to you guys? And they have made this whole dream of this is what I want done after my death without conceptualizing the idea that they are going to need a funeral home. And I say shame on our funeral service environment, that the families are out there with this little education on the topic, that they ask me, how does the body get to your site? And I say, well, I'm working with a couple of different funeral homes. It depends on where you're calling from. And they say, oh, no, we're not going to have a funeral. You just asked me how you're going to deal with mortuary transportation. What do you say? You do need a funeral home. You need a funeral director. And they don't even realize that they need it. And they think that a funeral is this capital F thing that takes place in a church. And that if they're choosing a green burial, that it's like non-applicable. And we have a lot of work to do to correct this. But for me, I also see this as a huge opportunity. And what I've noticed is when I have this conversation and someone calls me because they Googled like green things I can do with my body, or they saw, we have a show on Rocky Mountain PBS, and they've seen that and they think that's the long and the short of it. It's not at all. So if they're not averse to the word funeral, look, you got to call my friend at the mortuary. They'll be able to set you up with a plan. It could be really minimal. It could be just, transportation, no embalming. Family can supply the handmade vessel. It's still a green burial. It's just you are using a funeral home for help. I think there's huge opportunity if someone wants to be the funeral service that bridges this gap. There is a huge gap in the market. And I know that because the folks when I tell them, oh, you got to call my friend at the funeral home, they are picking up that phone and calling and purchasing in a plan with an alarmingly high rate. And it actually, I think this is the next slide. It is. There are funeral homes that have not taken my presentation yet, that are not even wanting to talk about what I'm offering down here in Florence. It's a new option for families in Colorado, but I think some conventional funeral service businesses see natural burial as a threat, because in some ways I do represent a loss of your margin on the casket, your margin if sometimes the funeral home sells the vault, sometimes the cemetery sells the vault, but in this case, funeral home might lose the margin on the vault as well. They're also going to lose the embalming and restorative art charges. But look, I am a funeral person. I did my apprenticeship. We were the care center for 8 Catholic mortuaries in Oakland, California. So we embalmed everybody. I have seen some situations where embalming, has been a godsend, a blessing for the families because of the circumstances. And there are also many, many cultural traditions where embalming is going to facilitate the funeral that they want to have. And no amount of concern for the planet or carbon emissions or whatever is going to change the fact that these folks are bound by religion or tradition to ask for a funeral with embalming. So I am not trying to end embalming by any sense of the imagination, and I'm not trying to take a bite out of a margin for a conventional funeral home. What I'm really trying to do is add another option, because I believe some families are, I'm not trying to end embalming. I'm trying to end embalming for families who would be better served by a funeral that represents a return to earth. Duh. So I am suggesting to funeral homes that you can recoup that potential loss of margin in the merchandise and embalming fee with other services. And just as an aside, you can sell green burial merchandise. You can get it shipped overnight like your regular caskets. It fits right into any funeral home's business model. It's easy to add. So that argument is gone. You can make your markup on that. But I would like to suggest you also make your markup on the family's experience. That's what this charter bus is about. So if you guys are, Denver metro area funeral directors, it's going to be about a 2-hour drive with your funeral to get down here for the committal service. My suggestion is Do it with a charter bus. When we're ready, we'll have do it with a no emissions charter bus. On board, you can serve all organic lunch in compostable, wrappings. And with the AV on the bus, you can do your slideshow and pass around your, microphone to do your sharing tributes. And then when you're out in the burial preserve, everyone's going to get all the, do their shoveling. You've got the restroom right there to, do a little of freshening up and keeping the people comfortable. And then they will have had this incredible experience and still yet have the togetherness and place to rest on the ride home. A good funeral service business could make a markup on all of those things: the bus, the catering, the movie. It is time to be creative. Polluting the earth should not be the way we make our money. And yes, embalming and vaults and really ornate caskets, there will always be a market for those, and that can be a portion of your business plan. But if you are relying on polluting ones and ignoring regenerative ones, shame on you, shame on you. And I should have mentioned as well, this Briar Rose design thing at the bottom, a natural, local, plastic-free, in-season floral arrangements. You guys don't even have to have a green burial. People, you ever drive by Whole Foods on a Saturday, it is packed with people who will pay triple for their eggs and milk because it gives them this feeling that they're, doing what they ought to do for the environment, right? And so I think local, in-season, biodegradable floral arrangements should be at every funeral, not just green burials. If you're not working with a florist like that already, start today. Okay, last slide. I didn't even mention this. I should have. I'm also on the board for the Green Burial Council. I joined them to work on in the role of funeral service provider certifications. So GBC has a separate certification for funeral services as there's different categories than cemeteries. But what a certified funeral home is defined as is it's easy to find green burial on their website. It's just general description of the options. If you look at their GPL and CPL, it's easy to find what services you're going to need for a green burial, and you're going to have a choice of at least 3 appropriate containers. And also this funeral home will have a policy that's not going to say, oh, if you want open casket, it's an auto embalming. I really believe that, okay, sometimes people are going to be in such bad shape that it's not a good idea to have open casket without major restorative work, including embalming. But a lot of times you can put an unembalmed body in your chapel and the ceiling will not cave in. There are so many situations where, including for ship outs, including for someone that wants to keep a body at home for some amount of time, a limited prep is going to be enough for this short amount of time, for this, intimate group of people who already saw them when they were sick. GBC certified funeral home does not start with the policy embalming is required for viewing, but rather has this respect for the idea that's really a case-by-case basis. And that's kind of the heart of funeral directing, is examine the case, examine the situation, listen to what the family's asking for, and find some kind of middle groundy solution that's going to walk the line between what's a good idea and what's going to give these families what they need. So I mentioned the GBC requires green burial info on the website. We did not weigh in on this recent question about the update to the FDC rule and GPLs on the website. But we did weigh in on, since you're updating the FTC rule, GBC had a problem with the way the embalming statement reads, like, if you don't wish for embalming, you have the right to choose a funeral that doesn't need embalming, like a funeral without a viewing. And to me, that implies in its inverse that if you have a funeral with a viewing, that embalming would be required. And, it's not true. It happens every day all around the country and the world that people are viewed without embalming. So we don't feel that the FTC rule ought to imply that a funeral with a viewing necessarily involves embalming. And that's really, go to my little FAQ slide here, because we did make it to the end, you guys, but that question about embalming and viewing and funeral directing, that's really where I wanted to end. It's like, we have a responsibility as funeral professionals to set up all of the options and not assume that it's going to be the way their parents and grandparents did, and not assume the way that's going to be the one you did this morning is going to go, and just allow for them to be case by case bases, and realize that it's going to take a lot of education and communication with the family. It's the hardest part, but it's really the heart of funeral service. So that's what I wanted to tell you guys. And these are kind of my FAQs that go towards the public. I don't know that these will be the same as what your questions are, but I did want to save a little time to answer your questions if you have them.